Welcome to the show, All Things Writing. I am your host, Brian the Writer. Let me take you on a journey through my writing life and introduce you to some of the amazing talent that exists in the writing world. Whether you are looking for a little advice or just to catch an interesting interview, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. All Things Writing starts now. Welcome to All Things Writing. I'm your host, Brian the Writer. Thank you for coming with me on my journey today. I really appreciate it. I have another exciting interview for you today. Actually, probably one of the cooler interviews you're going to see. I have a very special guest who has a book coming out very, very soon. We're going to get to that. Before we do, let me talk to you a little bit about a quick little note. I just finished reading Satan's Petting, the glare from the window. Satan's Petting Zoo. This is a good friend. My good friend Brian Kozecki wrote this, along with Chris Pisano. It was a pretty great book. I enjoyed it. I think of it this way: it's sort of like the revenge of the nerds become lycanthropes. So there you go. Highly recommend it. I'm going to do up an official, actual review as soon as I have a little bit of time. Now, on to today's show. We see a lot of times in the horror writing community the same names, cropping up. You see the same people knowing other people. I know that sounds really weird, right? But like, for example, you see the name Jeff Strand. You see, you see Chismar. You see Malfi. You see these guys. You also see the name Mark Rainey. So it was very, very cool when I was talking with Mark one day about the book he has coming out soon. It's called The House at Blacktooth Pond, and that came up as something in the discussion where he was talking about getting it out there for people to see, putting together, doing interviews, doing whatever. And I said, well, we could get you on All Things Writing if you want, humble Brian, please. So he's on the show today. He's my guest today. So guy's been writing for a long time, but I'm not going to tell you all about his illustrious career. I'm going to let him do that. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Mr. Mark Rainey. Mark, welcome.
All right, thanks, Brian.
You're welcome. It's very exciting to have you on.
Well, I appreciate that. It's nice to be on a show where people like the host doesn't automatically just close everything up and go, "Wow!"
Well, to be fair, my mouse is out of batteries, so I wasn't able to get to it fast enough.
Oh,
sorry,
I understand.
I always say, I say in the as I said earlier in the show, in the beginning section, I said, we get, I'm fortunate, and I know how truly blessed I am in that I'm sort of, I'm a very, very little fish in a much bigger pond, but I know some of the bigger fish that I can occasionally get to come spend time with me on the show. So I'm lucky enough to get you to come along, and I trapped you into being on the show, which
yes, that's true. I'm not going to mention all the goodies that you offered to bribe me here. Other people might expect the same.
Mark's actually locked up in my basement right now. Blink twice if you don't feel safe. But I really, I didn't tell. I always like to let people talk about how they got started, and so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself to get us kicked off?
Well, I currently live in Martinsville, Virginia, in the house where I grew up from the time I was about a year and a half old until I went to college back in the 70s. I am that old. But as a youngster, we've had lots of woods around these houses. And at night, as a kid, I would hear the sound of whippoorwills, and I found them creepy. Now, they're not around anymore, so I don't really get to hear them, but they actually scared me. And at that time, I was watching stuff like The Outer Limits and The Twilight Zone that my dad would watch. Yeah. And you couldn't convince me that those noises came from a little bird. To me, I equated those with the monsters in The Outer Limits. And it was fairly terrifying to me. But as I got older, all that stuff started, the creepy stuff would linger in my mind. Of course, I was a big monster kid, loved dinosaurs, Godzilla. You can see I got bunches of Godzilla stuff.
Oh, no, there. It's Godzilla.
Oh, yeah. And at school, I would like to go, at show and tell, which we had, up till I was like in the third grade or something. I would always embellish the story, the reasons that I was scared at night. I'd see a falling star and say, well, there a flying saucer came down out of the sky and landed behind my house. And there were a few gullible folks, and I came to learn that as much as being scared, I enjoyed scaring other people. So that sort of got me into the writing. Back in the old days, I did a lot of artwork, pen and ink and painting. In fact, I got an art degree from the University of Georgia. But it was about that time that I discovered H.P. Lovecraft and really got into the cosmic horror mode. Yeah. And I would write these little stories and illustrate them in pen and ink and stuff like that. But the more I got into that, the more I started gravitating more toward the writing than the art. So now it's been a very long time since I've done any actual artwork. I do graphic design and stuff like that. That was my day job, but it's not like the old, the pen and inks and watercolors and acrylic paints of monstrous things that I used to do.
Yeah, I think that whole world has changed so dramatically, and when you look at the way in which we kind of made that leap from pen and ink to all electron, it was a pretty quick transition. Now I get the question all the time from fans and readers and my own relatives who question my sanity, rightly so. The question is, what motivates us to write? So what do you think motivates you to write? You talked a little bit about the whippoorwills.
Yeah. The fact that I was the world's most terrified kid, that was something that needed to be shared. That's not one of those things I could keep to myself. And as I mentioned, I did start gravitating more toward the storytelling itself than the visual depictions of it. For a long time, they went hand in hand, but I didn't continue doing artwork long enough to stay in good practice. I mean, artwork is something you have to stay in practice, or I might remember a lot of the basics, but I could never go back and do some of the stuff of the quality that I used to. And I was an avid reader from the time I was a kid. And of course, I started out with science fiction and fantasy and all that. I think the very first adult book I read Arthur C. Clarke's 2001: A Space Odyssey when I was like 9 years old. And of course, my dad, I'd seen the movie, and I saw the book in the bookstore, and I really, really wanted it. And Dad said, "You're not going to understand that." And but he got it for me, and I read it. I comprehended it pretty well. In fact, it actually sort of opened my eyes to some of the stuff in the movie. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the moment that reading that book at such a young age, I think it convinced me that I wanted to adopt this storytelling mode, to use all this stuff in my imagination and put it into words and pictures. And that it's stuck to this day. I'm still as avid reader as I can be, my eyes don't hold up to reading as many books as I used to. So audiobooks have been my venue of choice lately. I try to walk 3 to 5 miles every single morning to keep myself from falling apart. And I've got an audiobook for company every day. So I get through a lot that way.
I try to walk at least an hour a day. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't, but I get close most days. And I do love the idea of having that audiobook with you. But my earbuds are the problem right now. I need to get a new earbud. But so I guess, I think of storytelling and writing. So anybody can be taught the correct rules of writing. I always say that school can teach you how to put together a good paragraph, how to obey the rules, but it can't teach you to be a good storyteller. That's a different thing. But what inspires you to keep going after all this time?
I think when I read a particularly good book or a series of books, I had a long time ago, I read The Keep by F. Paul Wilson. And I knew that there were a number of books that followed that, that was the opening volley in this conflict over a large series of novels of his. So I got all those on audiobooks and just listening to his voice and the storytelling that he uses, and I'm using Paul as one of the most recent examples. I mean, this goes back as far as I ever wanted to write, but it's being inspired by another writer, someone whose voice touches just the right nerves. And once those nerves are stimulated, then my brain goes off into its own creative tangent, sometimes for better, sometimes or for worse. But I would say I'm addicted to it. It's writing, I would say, is an addiction. And obviously, I've been at this a long time, and I've been in a lot of large publications. I've had a good many novels published, so I want to get paid for my work too. Yes. But I'm going to write no matter what. But for stuff I'm not necessarily getting paid for, I keep a blog all the time, and it's not a newsworthy blog. It's not something that is out there to enlighten other people. It's just sort of a personal chronicle that I record details of meaningful events in my life. I talk about my writing, books I've read, movies I've seen, things like that. It's not necessarily profound, but to me, it keeps those crucial nerves activated. And then now that I'm retired from my day job, I write almost full-time hours, sometimes more than full-time hours, depending on what I was doing. When I was working on my most recent novel, The House at Blacktooth Pond, I probably averaged 6 to 8 hours a day working on that every single day. I probably missed a day here or there, but that was the discipline that I set for myself, was to make this a full-time project. And I'm currently writing, I may be jumping ahead, but I'm currently writing a new novel with collaboration with Elizabeth Massey. And we have just started into this. I mean, I'm in the very opening stages of that.
Yeah. Well, you actually brought up an interesting point. When you're writing full time. So I always point, I love to say I have exactly 8 years, 4 months, and 6 days until I can retire. Not that I'm counting. I am counting, just kidding. But when I can retire, and then I'm just going to write full time. So when you're in that full time writing zone, let's use The House as an example. How long did it take you from concept to first draft?
This one was a little bit different than the way I've done books before, because I had written a short story of the exact same name that has recently appeared in the anthology Shunned Houses, edited by Catherine Karasman and S.T. Joshi. So it was a Lovecraftian anthology, but wasn't, it was certainly not Cthulhu mythos or anything like that. Sure. It was supposed to be ghost stories, scary stories, set in houses. So I already had that story that was my leaping off point. After I finished that story, I started looking at the various possibilities for expanding that, for continuing characters and all this stuff. So after I wrote that story, it was almost a matter of hours before I started extending the threads that started in that story. The novel is a whole separate animal. If you've ever read T.E.D. Klein's The Events at Perothe Farm, that was expanded into a novel called The Ceremonies, and I would liken this same kind of thing. It's two different interpretations of the same idea. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that answers your question so much as gave you a little background on how, but it wasn't very long at all for the idea of making it a novel until I just, leapt whole hog into it.
Yeah, I could imagine if you've got that amount of time to pour into it. I know that when even, and I talk a lot about new writers, especially carving off that initial 15 minutes a day to write and then 30 minutes. And I know that when I'm writing just an hour every day and I'm working on something fresh, going first draft, it doesn't take me that long to get that first draft out because I have the time dedicated, devoted. I guess that's my way of saying to anybody who's listening, and Mark will back me up on this one, you've got to set aside time to write. It's very, very important.
Quite so.
Yeah. So you have a new book coming out.
Yes.
Very exciting.
Yes, that is The House at Blacktooth Pond, the novel. I believe I started the actual writing of that in June of this year, and I finished it around the end of September. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Crossroad Press is going to be releasing it, and for a few years I was doing entries in Elizabeth Massey's Ameriscare series for young readers. So I did I had done 6 novels for the young readers, and it was time I did a novel for bigger people. Yeah. And I was hankering to do it, and Dave Wilson at Crossroad was saying, we need a new big people novel from you. So that was just a ticket.
Yeah, I was involved in a conversation this morning with a friend, and I ended it with the publisher gets what the publisher wants. That's kind of the way it works. When they ask you to write something, you write it.
Yeah, quite so. This novel is it's based on some very real locations. It was actually setting that sparked the book. There's 2 different spots here in Martinsville that inspired both the story and the novel, and one was back behind the high school here where I went to high school. Was it's still there. There's a pond, and at one end of it, there were a bunch of old tree trunks that stuck up out of the water. That when I discovered that back in high school, I thought, man, Blacktooth Pond. That was the name I coined for it. I later learned that it was called Lester Pond out of the after the owner of the land back there.
It doesn't sound anywhere near as cool as Blacktooth.
It does not. but I found it because in my 10th grade biology class, our biology teacher trooped a bunch of us down this dirt road into the woods right behind the high school, which was at the edge of town. And the first thing we saw was all grown up trees grown all over it. It looked like some kind of old service station. It had it was a brick building with old bays and trees literally pushing their way out of the structure. So that had been there for a long time. And then we came upon the pond. And it was early morning. This is my first period class, and there was a mist over the water and those trees sticking up out of the end of it. And I thought, this is the most haunted looking place I've ever seen. And even at that time, that imagery, the sense of just an eerie sense stuck in my mind, and it's been there for all these years. And back in 2010, I went back there, and everything looked just the same as it ever had. Huh. I'm going to backtrack a little. Back in college, I often drove down that road to, sometimes have adventures with members of the opposite sex in that area, and occasionally to find ways of, altering consciousness without other people knowing about it. So I spent a lot of time back there in my college days. And then after that, I don't think I went back there until 2010 when I introduced she was my girlfriend then, my wife now, and I showed her that area, and it was still very, very cool. But I went back there a few months ago, and they've cut all those woods down. The pond is still there. They knocked down the old building that was back in there. There's a thin ring of woods right around the pond itself, but they took all the other. There's probably 60 acres back there. They probably, I bet you they logged almost all of that. And that was very disheartening to see. So, but anyway, that's the Blacktooth Pond of the title.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I had a similar pond in my past, which is actually no longer even there because it was part of an old farm, and the farmer's dogs that he had for security were hopelessly lazy. They really they could be bribed with some cheese. Really didn't take much. So we used to go down there all the time just to sort of check it out and go crawfish hunting.
Yeah. We've got a creek across from the house here, and I guess there's still crawfish in it. But yeah, I used to do that a lot as a kid. And I had mentioned there were two settings. Another was the house part of it. It was in a different location, a little farther out in the county. And back in the 90s, my brother my younger brother had a dog named Luther, a big black lab, and he'd like to ride out in the country and just find, sort of secluded places for Luther to go walking. He loved running in the woods. Oh, yeah. And, there was a river nearby with a waterfall, and we'd go back there, and then just riding down a road. It was actually one night we didn't have Luther with us at the time. We just wanted to go back and check out some of the old locations back in the county, and we were walking down this muddy path off of the little country road, and it was almost pitch dark back there, but I noticed the trees that were beside us on either side of this trail. I looked up, and there was a curiously angled contour amongst the trees, and I realized I was seeing the roof line of a totally overgrown house.
Oh, wow.
And so we wandered about it. We didn't. All we had for light was a couple of cigarette lighters, so we could not see very much of it. And so we resolved to go back there in daylight, and so we did, and just explored all throughout it. If you ever saw the Blair Witch Project, the house that appears in that movie looks remarkably like that place, and it had a second floor that. The first time we went there, it's like, no, we're not going up those stairs because there were holes in the floor and all that stuff. Yeah. But then in our wisdom, my brother had a friend. This was after I had graduated college, and he was in college, I think, at the time. He had a friend who was getting married, and so they decided to have his bachelor party at this old house back in the woods, and it was just a handful of people. But we went back there, and again, certain mind-altering substances might have been involved.
Naturally.
But no flashlights, just cigarette lighters. We all trooped inside that house, and God help us, went up the stairs. And how we didn't fall through the floor, I will never know, but we did not. But I knew then and there that one of these days I got to use this house for something. And after all these years, I combined the setting of the pond and the setting of the house. And by God, some creepy shit, it happens there. It's just got to.
So do you think, now I always say on all things writing, we do not do spoilers. However, I'm not spoiling anything. I have not read the book yet. I absolutely want to. However, the author is more than welcome to spoil whatever they want to, not pressuring you. But so is there something in there that you mentioned creepy? Some creepy shit happened.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something in there that you're particularly proud of, or really want to just draw people to?
There is. Remember, I had mentioned the whippoorwills that scared me as a kid. There's something that makes the sound of a whippoorwill that might not be a whippoorwill, and the allure of that is what motivates a couple of the characters to delve further into. There are other strange things besides that happening that that engage them, but there's that particular aspect of it is what continues to hold allure for them, and so it motivates them to explore where they probably shouldn't be.
I love it. Now, Virginia, as a setting, do you think there's something inherently creepy about Virginia?
Well, I won't get personal, but no. I having grown up here and in a mostly rural location, of course, I lived a lot of years in Chicago too, so I've lived in the most rural of settings and the most urban of settings.
I'm
and
actually
they both
from South Chicago, so yeah.
They both have their great allure as far as the potential for spooky, creepy things to happen. As a youngster, I spent a lot of time up in the mountains. My folks would take us up to the Blue Ridge Parkway. We'd go out to Mabry Mill, if you're familiar with that. And we'd go down these long, very, very scenic back roads. And oftentimes, to me, the most scenic locations have the most potential for creepy things, especially like fog. My wife and I, a few years ago, we went up to Buffalo Mountain off of the Parkway, and we hiked up this mountain, and it was so misty and foggy there. You couldn't see very far at all. I took a lot of photos, and some of the photos that I took, when I see those, I'm like, this is the creepiest damn thing I've ever seen. And it was kind of creepy when we were walking in it. Of course, if you're going to worry about anything, it's more like falling off a cliff, or a bear coming out of the woods at you. But I, in my imagination, I've always liked to extend potential threats into the otherworldly, I suppose. And the fact that fear is my earliest remembered emotion, well, I equate that with home, and Virginia was home.
Yeah.
So it's a very personal thing, but in my writing, I certainly like to convey the creepiest aspects, or what I find to be the creepiest aspects of Virginia itself. And I mean, Virginia's got a lot of old legends. It's got a lot of history, a lot of stuff to draw on there.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Now I read a little bit of the description of the book.
Mhm.
You have two characters that their sort of lives kind of intertwine. Um, what inspires the character development for you? Where are you grabbing these people from? These fictional people from?
Yeah, one is one of the main characters is the local sheriff, and I have actually had a couple of friends in law enforcement, but one in particular who has shared so many anecdotes of mostly online, but of things that have gone on, in his career as a sheriff's deputy, and all that really caught my interest. I've always had a fondness for police procedural stuff,
Mm-hmm.
so I wanted to delve into a character and complement that character with police procedural a procedural aspect of the book. And to one thing I hadn't mentioned, this book is tied in. Many of my stories and novels take place in a fictional setting in Virginia, which is based on Martinsville. It's called Aiken Mill. And in the house at Blacktooth Pond, there's a couple of shared characters from an earlier novel called The Lebo Coven. And in that novel, I wrote in the early 90s. I had a character called Sheriff George Parrott. And in this novel, we have Sheriff Bryce Parrott, who is his son.
Oh, okay.
And it won't hurt to say that in the Lebo Coven, Sheriff Parrott doesn't make it. So Bryce Parrott, his most vivid memory of his father is his father not coming home one night.
Hmm.
So I've used that as motivation for the sheriff's character to delve deeply into unexplained incidents here. The other main character is a psychology professor at it's a fictitious college I call Beckham College, which is actually based on Ferrum, which is where I went to school. The founder of Ferrum College was Samuel Beckham, so I made this college called Beckham College. I changed the locations around a bit, but he and it starts out on a somewhat autobiographical note where he and his brother are taking his brother's dog out into the country, and they find a weird secluded house out in the woods. But the things that start happening out there are clearly weirder than what happened in my experience, unless you're listening to me and go, well, that must have been pretty weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because he's weird. But I took several psychology courses in my college days, and although I didn't go into the psychology field by a long shot, I was always fascinated by that. They were some of the most memorable courses I ever took, so I wanted my character to be one of those who has who conveys psychological information, and it gives him he uses that to gain insight into things that are happening.
I always I do a lot of reading about real life serial killers. I always like to say it helps to make my serial killers more serial killery.
Yes.
Yeah. I like what you said about police procedurals. I've got behind me here a whole section of my bookshelf here is stuff on forensics, and I've got one book here. It's become kind of my go-to. It's Forensics for Dummies. It's to make sure that if I write something, I don't want emails coming back to me saying you got this wrong.
Yeah.
And to me, I would consider it a failure if I didn't. So I love the incorporating the psychological aspects into what you're writing. I think I think it's the mark of a truly great work when that kind of time and attention is actually poured into it, versus somebody who just phones it in, right? Because that
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah, I did do every book I write, if anything that is based in real life, I try to do a lot of research. And in a book like this, where there's a lot of paranormal stuff going on, and obviously you have to stretch boundaries and all that. But
Sure.
Going back a little bit, I have a novel called Blue Devil Island. It's a World War II military story. It's set in 1943 in the Solomon Islands. The story of an American fighter squadron who finds something a little more frightening than the Japanese out on that island. And that was one that I've always been big into military aviation. And I did 3 years of research before I even began to write that book. And plus, a lot of it was, there was also just a lot of accumulated knowledge from my appreciation of the subject over a lot of years. But the best compliment I ever got for anything I wrote was the CEO of the company where I used to work. His dad was a Hellcat pilot in the Pacific in World War II, and he read the book, and he actually called me at the office one day to tell me how much he enjoyed that book.
Aww.
And he basically said, it's almost hard to believe you weren't there, because he said you nail so many of the elements of what life would have been like at the time. He said, here and there I had to raise an eyebrow a little bit, because, that was many years before my time and everything. Yeah. But regardless, the fact that somebody who had been there was impressed by it.
Yeah.
Was that I could hardly get through the door that day because my head was too big.
Yeah. That is an incredible compliment. I've tried to find, I've been on my search for many years. I'm looking for actual recordings of bomber crews talking within the plane. They're very hard to find.
Yeah, I would imagine so. It was, I was able to find things online that really, actually, I was surprised to be able to find when I was writing the book. And I wrote it in the very early 2000s. I think it was 2003. But even then, I was able to find so much very detailed information. I found a lot of combat reports from that time period in that place. And so in some cases, if in my book I said, at X longitude and latitude, if it was dumping rain at 2 p.m, that's because I found a combat report from that area that said it was dumping rain at 2 p.m. So
fun.
That was, who the hell else would know about that? But it satisfied me that I had done that much. I found that much as authenticity.
I think we do that as authors. We tend to throw things in that is only going to make us laugh, make us tear up. But we do it for ourselves, I think, for the joy of writing.
Yeah, the hardest thing when I do a ton of research for a book, the hardest thing for me is to know what not to include.
Yeah, because
you don't want info dumps that are going to, have the reader either skip over it or just go, no, this is too much. They want you, first and foremost, you've got to engage them with the story, and if you can include details that are meaningful, that's great. And sometimes, even like I said, even the weather thing, trivial, but it's still part. It's in this case, it was a meaningful aspect of the story of the weather there. But yeah, it's very hard to balance sometimes the details that add nuance and make it a richer reading experience. Keep that from becoming a large info dump, which is a big no-no.
Yeah, Tom Clancy once wrote a book on submarines, and I had to put it down. Like the third page where he was going over the strength of the plating on the submarines, and I went, I can't keep going. I just can't keep it. It's too much.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. So give us, and I started doing this a while back on the show, and I kind of like the result. So I always tell people, give us your best elevator pitch Say I'm standing in front of you at your table at an event and you're selling books. Give me your best pitch for The House at Blacktooth Pond.
Okay. This is a haunted house book or a haunted house story that really isn't about a haunted house. It's about something deeper and what I hope is far more frightening than your average ghost. I'll go out on a limb and say there's a certain amount of allegory and metaphor for the, just current state of affairs in the world. It's buried pretty deep in there, but there's, I think it's relevant to where we are today.
Well, I think that's good because you really, I mean, we do, it's our job as authors to hold a mirror back to the world. As artists, that's our job.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, first and foremost, it is entertainment. It's all about hopefully giving you a little chill. You read that before you go to bed and might keep you awake for a little while. I hope.
That's the best kind.
Yeah.
And of course, the single most important question I ever asked on all things writing, without a doubt, is where can people find your work?
Well, everything that I have in print is available on Amazon. I'm not even sure a lot of times these days. Some of my stuff goes back so far. I think most of my novels, the only one that I know is not in print anymore is my first Dark Shadows novel that I co-wrote with Elizabeth Massey back in 1999, I believe it was. That was from HarperCollins, and it's long out of print. But I think almost all my other titles are available, and they're all on Amazon. Some from Barnes & Noble. But you can't go wrong ordering them from Amazon.
Well, I know The House at Blacktooth Pond is available for pre-order right now.
That's correct.
So through the miracle of my powers that I give myself when I put these shows together, I'm going to put up a QR code right now, bam, for you to scan it with your phone, and it'll take you to the Amazon site, and you can pre-order the thing. It's very easy to do. Very easy to do. We'll make it easy for you. It's been great fun. I'm actually really excited to read the book. I after reading the back, I'm like, yeah, this goes on the to be read pile.
Yeah. Well, I hope it doesn't disappoint.
I doubt it will. It sounds kind of right up my alley anyway. I do love. I do love. It's interesting. I'll get some books that I'm reading and it takes me forever to get through. And then I'll get some books, I'll sit down and I'll read it and I'll be done with it in like 2 days. I'm like, I literally would give up going to work just to finish this book. So, we'll
I think the only time I could ever say that was when it was in the 80s, I guess. I called in sick to work one day so I could stay home and finish Misery by Stephen King. I was so engrossed in that.
I read Ronald Malfi's Black Mouth recently, and that was one that almost kept me at home to get through it. It was kind of crazy how much I loved that book. But I'm excited to, and ladies and gentlemen, this is again, go out and get The House at Blacktooth Pond. Get it ordered now so that when the book is released, it'll just show up. It's like magic, really. We're just wizards. That's really all authors are.
February 11th, 2025 is the actual release date. And for right now, the pre-orders are for the paperback and the ebook. And there will be an audio book that Joshua Saxon will be the narrator for, and he is truly one of my favorites. In fact, I'm right now listening to F. Paul Wilson's The Upwelling, and Joshua reads that one, and he's really incredible.
That's cool. That's very, very cool. Well, Mark, thank you for hanging out with me today. I absolutely appreciate it. And for you, gentle listeners and viewers, I really appreciate you hanging out with us today. If you liked what you saw, if you liked the conversation, please hit the like button on that channel so you can know when more great content comes out. Not only do I do this show, I also do the little 5 minutes with Brian. And I've been promising people I would do another 5 minutes with drunk Brian, but I need to set aside time to do that because literally I have a couple of old fashions and I come on and talk about with pretty much whatever comes up on my mind, and it's usually ridiculousness, but it's a lot of fun.
And that's one of my favorite drinks too.
I do. I found an old fashioned, and for a sweetener, I use natural maple syrup.
Ah, yes.
It's delicious. Delicious.
Yeah. I like a smoked old fashioned, and my wife got me last Christmas, got a smoker where you can put your glass in there and infuse it with the smoke. It's really nice.
It really is. I had it the first time in Vegas, and I went, you know what? This is amazing. I love it.
All righty then.
Well,
I really appreciate you having me on, Brian.
I appreciate you.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah. And ladies and gentlemen, for all things writing, this is Brian the Writer and my guest Mark saying thank you very much and have a great day. This has been another amazing episode of All Things Writing. If you heard something that got your wheels spinning, check out the links in the show notes. Also, please follow the show and remember to leave those reviews. Those simple acts of kindness mean the world to us. Hop on over to briannowak.com, and that is Brian with a Y, and check out my latest novels. I'm on Amazon or wherever you buy your ebooks. And as a reminder, the music you heard on the show today was used under license from the artist Ryan Ancona. Thanks for listening to the show and have a blessed day.